Okay, here we are, and we're going to do the lecture and then hopefully a little bit about the graded assignments. Okay, D2L, here we are. Remember when we left, we had one window, which is this one here, open to the podcast, and a second window, which was password protected, had the lecture guide. And I've scrolled this one down to the lecture slides, which are a little bit more like how every week will normally be. Okay, and you also have, don't forget, a printout, right, of that lecture guide. You have it here sitting next to your computer, or you have a window open in your computer with that as like a Word file or something. All right, so here we go. You got your lecture guide, that's what you're looking at, but to hear the sound, you've got to press play. So I've started this in the middle, or got this up to the middle, and you'll notice that this little window has a picture which looks just like the first slide. See that? So we'll go ahead and listen to this just for a little teeny bit so you see what it's like, and then I'll talk. Here we go.
So we'll be talking about that later in the semester, but first we'll get some of the basics under our belt before we get into ethical discussions. Okay, now get yourself back to the lecture guide and move along to where it says slide 2. But before we look at that, notice that two things I highlighted during the lecture just now, I have a little place in this lecture guide for you to remember to write those things down. Here's a hint, these kind of things may end up on the quiz. So when in a lecture I have you pause, write something down, take a note, especially if I highlight it in the lecture activities file, make sure you write those down and remember them. That's one of the ways that I help make sure that you have actually participated in listening to this podcast. On to slide 2. Here are some pictures. There are some eucalyptus trees, eucalyptus, and you might recognize those as trees that grow around in California. The one on the left is really brown and dead looking, and the one on the right is pretty alive and happy looking. And if you look at the labels of these pictures, the one on the left says control, and the one on the right says transgenic. What's happened to these trees is that they actually live really near each other, and there's been a frost or a freezing. And the plant on the left has died because it got too cold. And the plant on the right, even though it got just as chilly, didn't die. And what these are examples of some biotech products made by the company I used to work for, which is called Mendel Biotechnology. And you can see that there's a link to their webpage right underneath this picture on the slides. Don't go there yet. What Mendel does is that it changes the DNA of plants to make them able to survive in different conditions. And so the transgenic plant, transgenic means that there's an extra gene added, has some kind of DNA that makes it able to withstand freezing temperatures. The control plant doesn't have that DNA, and so it dies in the freezing temperatures. As I said, I used to work at this company, Mendel Biotechnology. I was a scientist there, and I did indeed work on genes, or traits, we call them, that gave plants freezing tolerance. And that's what this example you see right here is called freezing tolerance. The plant on the right has a transgene, a gene that Mendel designed or discovered, put it in the plant, and now that plant is tolerant to freezing. The plant on the left is not transgenic. It doesn't have this extra DNA, so it's not tolerant to freezing. I also, besides working with DNA at Mendel Biotechnology, I also work with proteins. Now, proteins, you can briefly call them the products of DNA. They're what actually make organisms do things or function. And I worked to discover the proteins that made plants tolerant to freezing, also tolerant to drought, meaning little water. I worked on genes and proteins that made plants be able to grow bigger without as much fertilizer. So let's go ahead and go to the company webpage right now. So you'll click on that link, and you should see a hand holding some soil and some plants. Companies definitely have snazzy-looking web pages, and Mendel is no exception.
Okay, so that was me doing the podcast, and you'll notice I've come back to D2L and paused the podcast. You can, of course, do that at any time. The lecture guide is still here. Notice that we're on slide 2, and that matches the picture in the podcast. And notice that when we clicked on that link to Mendel Biotechnology, a new link opened up in a new window. And while you listen to the podcast, you'll be looking at that window. I recommend that whenever we're done, you close out the window, that third one, and so you only have these two, the lecture guide and the podcast itself. And I hope you noticed, I was waving around, that you could fill in on your lecture guide hard copy that the tree on the left turned brown. You can fill in why that was. And the different jobs that I had. I mentioned those, and I might mention them again as the podcast went on. So this is the lecture guide. You listen to the podcast, which is audio, and you look at the lecture guide, which has pictures and links and places to fill in information. When you finish the lecture, that's like going to class, right? Then you'll get an assignment list. Quiz, discussion. This particular week, you need to email me just to practice, and you're going to do a practice assignment. You can read more about that if you like. I'm just going to go through those, but to do the quiz, guess where I'm going to get all of the questions? Yep, these blanks. If you fill in all the blanks, you will have access to answers that you'll need for the quiz. I promise, the quiz is just to check that you actually listen to the lecture. It's not to be tricky. This first week, there are some other things to look at that I'm not lecturing about. The quiz is going to cover all of these blanks. Okay? So you got your lecture guide, you filled out all the answers, time to go to the quiz. Well, where's the quiz? Here it is in the D2L. We'll close up the lecture guide things, the pre-module things. Look, graded things. The quiz is a graded thing. And look, we've got the quiz, we've got the discussion, and the assignment. For this little instructional video, we'll just check out the quiz real fast, and I'll do the discussion and the assignment in the last instructional video. So you click on quiz 1, and for you, don't click on it, or don't start it yet. But for me, I see the professor version, so that's not going to help you too much. But this is a quiz. It's a multiple choice quiz. You get an hour to do it. This first quiz, I let you keep taking it and taking it and taking it till you get 100%. Future quizzes, you'll get 2 shots at it, and your grade will be based on either the best one or later in the class, the average of your 2 tries. Okay, so you can't see the practice quiz here. Sorry about that. Let me see if that helps. Yeah, I don't have a good way to show that to you. So sorry about that. But anyway, a quiz is a quiz, and there's a little timer and stuff for you. Next up, we'll check out the discussion, and I'll click on that so that we're open to it. Okay, and I'm going to make a new video, though, so that the files aren't too big. So last few things on the 4th video will be discussion, the assignment, and then just a wrap-up of D2L. Okay, see you in a sec.